Hey guys, on today's special episode, we have our friend Kathleen. She runs our Impactful Families program at Impact, and she also does a ton of work with military veterans, law enforcement, first responders. So we talk a lot about the culture and kind of what that looks like and how the disease of addiction is very similar. So tune in. It's a good one. Thanks. Welcome to Impacting Recovery Uncensored. I'm your host, Sarah Pritchard. This is a podcast where we dive deep into the real, uncensored truths about addiction, recovery, and everything in between. No sugarcoating, no judgment, just honest conversations that can help lift up the solution. So let's get started today. I am very excited. We have our good friend, Kathleen, and our clinical lead and leader of our family program at Impact, who also does a ton of work with the military men and women in the mental health space. So, hi.
Hey, Sarah. I'm so excited to be on here this morning.
I know. I'm so excited to have you. And today's episode, I just want to get into your experience. Selfishly, I'm like, I want to, learn more about Kathleen's work that she does within the military space and just your experience with mental health. But every time you talk about it, I'm so intrigued, and it kind of spiked my interest on, I think this would be a good topic for listeners because, of course, there's such a large community out there that are veterans or, in the military. So I just thought it would be really great.
Well, I'm so excited. And I know that topic is near and dear to my heart.
Yes.
Our military veterans, their families, first responders, of course, those are all under the same category for those of us in the mental health field because, like you said, it just as many other cultures, it's a unique culture.
Yes. Yeah, for sure. And so I guess to kind of start things off, just tell everyone how long you've been in this world of mental health in general.
Sure.
And kind of how you got there.
Sure. So I started in 1991, believe it or not. Yes, I'm that old. And I wasn't just out of high school either. Initially, getting out of high school, I loved animals. I've loved animals all my life. I grew up on a farm, had horses and dogs and cats, and just really wanted to work in that field. So I went to school to be a veterinary technician. To be quite honest, I really didn't like people that much. And so did that for a while and then started to realize the healing power of animals for people and started to refocus what I wanted to do with my life. And that's how I ended up going back to college and getting my degree, first of all, in psychology and criminology, which gave me a view of law enforcement in that first part. And then continued to get a master's degree in community mental health and school counseling. And it wasn't until after I did that I really started to focus on the military and started taking courses, understanding more about trauma that military members experience and law enforcement experiences, and just deep diving. That was probably in the late 1999, around that time. And then went on when I was actually finishing my master's degree and started doing work with horses and people. So I did a lot of equine therapy training and getting into that.
Yes. And you have a wonderful farm with lots of lovely animals and love seeing all the pictures of that all the time.
Yeah, we do. And it really, because I never thought it was going to be like that, but it's funny how things get revealed to you as they just layers of things happen. And so the horses have been amazing. I did my master's thesis research, which I don't know if you know, but it was on the effect of horses with kids. And could horses help children that were experiencing depression or low self-esteem? And the results were significant, which I knew it worked. I just didn't know how to prove that it worked. And so that was kind of exciting for me to see that. And then really, as I went forward in my mental health career, working in the schools and working, as I said, with military and veterans, started to utilize animals more. And it was way before we had the farm that I set up a program for kids that had parents that were deploying to overseas. and it was called A Horses to Homecoming. So it was where the kids got to visit with the horses every week and send a letter to their parent that was deployed. And then when the veteran came back from overseas, which is usually a really tough time for families to reintegrate, they got to go meet this horse at like a celebration with their kid.
Aw.
So that was pretty cool. And it just was one more thing for me. And we didn't even have any horses
Yeah.
at that time. So,
Yeah.
and then dogs. So we've done a lot with dogs and
Yes.
training dogs to provide the support for veterans and their families that are transitioning as well.
And so when you mentioned kind of like the homecoming being hard for probably, I would assume, the families as well, maybe. I don't know, but especially the individual that has been deployed. What does that look like, or what do you see? Some of those things of why it would be hard, especially if somebody is experiencing addiction or issues with their mental health.
Right. And a lot of times, like what you're saying, experiencing addiction or issues with their mental health. So they're gone many times for a period of a year at a time, and they've left their family. And when they come back, they have things that no one understands what they've experienced.
Yeah.
And so it's very difficult for them, and very often they isolate, which then, of course, we know substance use, is often common for someone that's struggling with anxiety or post-traumatic stress, or even just trying to figure out how to fit in.
Mm-hmm.
And so the family struggles with that as well. And, part of what, you were talking about is I've brought that into what we do with impactful families at Impact, because the family member's away for a period of time, when they're going to treatment.
Yeah.
It's not as long as a year,
Yeah.
of course, but the family needs support understanding how to bring them home and how to understand that they're different than when they went.
Yes.
But that's a positive thing, One of the things that I liken it to is kind of like, everyone's in the family is in a canoe and they're going down a river, right? And you pull over to the edge and the military person gets out to go on their deployment. Well, the family keeps going down the river.
Yeah.
They're going to school, they're learning new things, the kids are. The significant other is meeting new people and having new experiences, and their family member who's deployed is just off, gone.
Mm-hmm.
And so when they come back to that same spot, and the family's down the river.
Yes.
And so I bring that up when we do the work at the Impactful Families group, because it feels so important to be able to teach the families, kind of help them come along the river.
Yeah.
Together. So as they're doing work in recovery, their family member that's in treatment, the family member can do similar work. It's not the same.
Yeah.
Because they're not struggling with the disease of addiction.
Right.
But they are in many ways, because they've lived that life.
Yeah. Well, and I love that you mentioned that, because I do remember, like, when I got out of treatment, it was like life is still going on. And everybody they're busy and they're doing their things. And I've just been in this little bubble for 36 days or whatever it was. And I just felt like I got like spit back out into the world. And this is, I also did not take suggestions on what I should have been doing when I left. But yes, I do remember the feeling of like, oh, life is still happening, and, people are still doing things, and here I am.
and there's a lot of that contributes to isolation, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's funny how when you were talking to me about coming on the podcast, and as I've been doing the groups with the families, the similarities that I see, because when you're working with people that are military, first responders, it's a culture.
Yes.
Kind of like we mentioned. And when working with people that are, struggling with the disease of addiction, whether it's the individual that's going into treatment or their family, there's a culture around that.
Mm-hmm.
Experiences that they have that other people have no idea about those experiences.
Right.
And so it's so important to have that information. I'm a really big advocate for mental health providers to understand the culture that happens for veterans and military and first responders, law enforcement. Because if you don't understand it, you don't have to have been that person. You don't have to be a veteran to understand. if you just try to understand and they see you try to understand, they feel like you care.
Mm-hmm.
And they recognize that maybe this person could help me through this.
Yeah. Well, and I'm glad you mentioned that as well, because we've had a handful of veterans come through Impact, and I have been like so scared I'm going to say the wrong thing, or like kind of walking on eggshells, or I really just don't even mention anything. And then I'm like, is that coming off as rude because I'm not acknowledging their service? And so it's, for me, I don't know, because I've never been a part of that world. And so, yeah, if you could kind of just share more on the culture and maybe certain things, and maybe I'm the only one that feels this way, but I just, I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings or set somebody off emotionally or something like that.
Right. Well, and I think you bring up a really good point. So we all want to do the right thing.
Mm-hmm.
We recognize that there's something different, but we're like, oh my gosh, what if I say that? What if I do this? And a couple funny things, like when I first started working in the Department of Defense, working with military members, right? That was in 2009. And I remember even though my son was in the service, my dad served in World War II, I was clueless. Like, I had no idea, right? So I would go to these meetings and I'd be sitting there as the one civilian, everyone else is in a uniform. And I had a position where I was pretty high up. I was advising them on how to take care of their troops from a mental health perspective. I had no idea. So I bought this book, okay, because it's Army Dictionary and Desk Reference, because they have so many like little acronyms,
Mm-hmm.
And so I'd be in a meeting and I'd be like writing down these acronyms. I didn't want to act like I didn't know what they were talking about, right? And I got back to my office one time and I'd had written down WTF. And I got my book out and I'm looking for it. And I'm thinking, Kathy, you're so ridiculous. You know what that means, right? And so it's funny and I can laugh about it. I share that story a lot with people that are trying to understand the culture.
Yes.
Because there's so many things. We'll never understand all of it because we didn't live it.
Yes.
But what we can understand is that we could do the best we can. Like, that's why, I had bought this book. Like, I need to better understand these things.
Yes.
And so...
And will you share the title of the book just
Sure.
for people that maybe are just listening?
Well, it's called Army Dictionary and Desk Reference,
okay.
Right? And they have them for every branch of service, but there's silly things like they'll say my MOS. They'll use these little statements, which I find interesting in recovery is the same way. And I'm like,
Yeah.
And I have to look it up. Like, thank goodness for the Googler, right? Because I can just quickly look it up. But so basically, like MOS means their military specialty, what they do for a job. That's all it means. And so they'll like spout off these things, or they'll go, hey, I went TDY, which means temporary duty. I mean, I didn't know, I learned it eventually. But so I think the biggest thing is to just say, to be honest, one, if someone as a provider has a family member that's served, say, hey, my dad served. I really want to thank you for your service.
Mm-hmm.
So then it's kind of like it gives that they understand why you're thanking them.
Yeah.
They know you didn't serve.
Yeah.
And it's the same, I think. Well, for me, I'm not in recovery. And there's a few people that aren't, right? And that work in programs, but I'm not going to act like I am.
Yeah. Right.
If I do, that's a great disservice because immediately it's going to shut them down to not feel comfortable talking to me.
Right. So
as a provider or as anyone like you that's working, doing the admissions, taking the phone calls, be willing to acknowledge, that I don't understand what you've been through. But we have people that can talk with you that will understand.
Yes.
So that they don't think they're coming to another island of a bunch of, they call, civilian people that have no idea.
Right.
Right.
Well, and you mentioned to me the other day, which I didn't think about this either, about, veterans that struggle with addiction and they go into recovery communities, but they don't have necessarily a community or a lot, if they do come across people that have served as well. Do you see that as being more difficult, or I don't know. I don't know where I want to go with that, but I'm just curious.
So I think they need both,
Mm-hmm.
right? I think they need, because a big part of what I saw that was helpful as I started doing more and more of this work is because they've got to be able to reintegrate back in the community, not completely lose who they are, because we shouldn't expect them to lose who they are, but be able to reintegrate back and be in civilian world, right? And so I think the mix of both in recovery is important because there are issues that veterans, military, law enforcement might need to talk about and share that someone would be like, oh,
Yeah.
I mean, remember what we're asking them to do. They sign on the line and give their up into including their life to go and serve for us, to protect us. And that's a possibility. And many of them come back, and people that they went with didn't come back.
Right.
A lot of people experience loss in addiction, absolutely. But there's also things that we ask them to do other than lose their own life, but sometimes take a life.
Yeah. And
that's not necessarily something that you can talk to with just anyone about.
Right.
So I think it's important to have both.
Yeah.
There's, and I'm going to bring this up on here because I think it's important. So a lot of people that struggle with addiction get caught up in the court system, right? And so there's some wonderful initiatives that have happened throughout our country to set up what's called Veterans Court.
Okay.
So it's a diversion court within the court system. And I'm a huge advocate for that. My husband and I, with what we do with veterans, we go and speak at the Veterans Court, local veterans courts. We provide community service opportunities for veterans to come to our farm because they're with other veterans, and we ask them to bring their families. And so we help them to see ways that they can serve and give back at the same time doing the service hours. But Veterans Court is important because the only people that are in that court are veterans. And so they've, committed a crime, and they need to do what they need to do for that crime. A large percentage have experienced substance use issues, whether it's a DUI or something related, a domestic sort of situation related to having, been under the influence when it happens.
Right.
And so, again, what happens in that court is amazing. Like, they have a social worker, they have people that they're assigned to that are volunteers. The majority of the volunteers in Veterans Court might not be in recovery, but they're usually veterans or family members of veterans. And they've gone through extensive training, and they volunteer to do this. And they're called a peer-to-peer program is what they do. But they help the veteran through the system. They ensure that the veteran knows what's available for them for support. The other thing that's unique about veterans is very often, they have medical issues. So not just mental health issues, but they have co-occurring medical issues. And oftentimes when they go to the VA and they get treatment, they're prescribed medications that sometimes we know can increase the likelihood of them becoming addicted to a substance.
Right.
And the system is getting better, but it could be a lot better, right? One of the things that's here in Alabama, I don't know if you know this, but there's over 400,000 veterans here. It's a lot in this state. And there's not nearly enough providers in a VA system to provide care for them.
Yes.
Does that mean that every of the 400,000 need mental health care or substance use treatment? No, of course not. But there's a large portion of them that do.
Right.
And so what happens is the VA will then contract out providers, civilian providers, which very often those civilian providers don't have a lot of knowledge. And so what happens, I actually spoke to one of our state representatives this morning about this because he's advocating for a bill. What happens is the veteran will go for care and someone has no idea what they're talking about or what they've experienced, so they just stop going.
Right.
And then it just creates this like a snowball effect.
Yeah. Well, and that kind of makes me think of even just with addicts and alcoholics, like we experience that as well on a level of, maybe going to a therapist or somebody that doesn't fully understand addiction. And not that they need to, but and it's more on us, right? Like, I just know that I went in and I'm like talking to this woman who seems so put together. She's never experienced addiction. So I'm like, I can't get honest with you. Like, I'm not going to go back because I don't feel comfortable. And so I can totally see where that would be a thing with, veterans on that sense, because when you can't relate, there's not that, it's harder to build that trust, or at least for me.
Right. And that's the part that I find unique about Impact. So, when we're also talking about the LGBTQ community, right, that there's pockets of cultures that very often feel misunderstood.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the things I love to be able to say to people that come in, including veterans that we've had at Impact, is that you're safe here.
Yeah.
And that's so important. And it's not just safe, with me, it's safe with all the guys that work there. You've done the podcast and I've watched them with the different guys that, work at Impact. They love them as a human being.
Yeah.
They really don't care what culture they're experiencing, as far as it's not a barrier to them loving them.
Right.
Which is so important.
Yes. Yes. And I was thinking about this because recently I was on an episode where Chad interviewed me in my story, and we're talking about women in recovery. And he's like, how do I approach a woman in a meeting if there aren't women and I don't want to say the wrong thing? And then this morning I was like, I am doing the same thing with other cultures, like you're mentioning, when it's like, no, can we just love them? And not, I love them and care about whoever comes through our doors or wherever, but I just get wrapped up on like, am I going to say the wrong thing? And it's like, no, if you just speak from the heart and it's going to be just fine. Doesn't matter which pocket of culture it's from or whatever.
I mean, I think you have to have the awareness, like you said, right? That this could potentially affect how they receive treatment or care.
Yeah.
And, like you said about you feeling unsafe or unsure whether you could share certain things with a therapist, right? It's always, a struggle for us as therapists. And because we want to ensure that someone feels safe. But the other part is we might not always be the right fit for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's the other part, is being able, like you said, it's your responsibility advocating for yourself, that walking in and saying, this is who I am.
Yeah.
This is what I've experienced. And if the person doesn't feel like they can handle it, right? Or you felt like you had pushback from them, either confront it and say, hey, it feels like you're a little uncomfortable with me sharing my story. Then you might need to find another therapist.
Right.
I mean, I hope that doesn't happen, but we're all human beings too, right?
Yeah.
And so there might be certain things that different people aren't experienced in. And I want to say, I feel like it's important when we're talking about aftercare for our guys that are leaving, right? I do my best to ensure that they engage with a therapist that has background and experience in addiction.
Mm-hmm.
Because it is a culture that it's so important, because if they're doing really well and they get with the wrong person that doesn't understand that, not because the person did it intentionally, but unintentionally, they might kind of lead them the wrong way.
Yeah.
Right. And this has been a big thing for me to understand and to learn. And I'm so grateful that you guys have taught me this, that recovery needs to come first. Mental health is important, and we talk about co-occurring disorders all the time, or whatever, and they do need to be treated or addressed together. But if someone that struggles with the disease of addiction isn't dealing with the disease of addiction first and the work that they need to do, we can't even begin to get over here with these other things.
Right. Yeah. And I do want to kind of go back for a second and talk a little bit about the military culture and environment with someone experiencing substance use, because I think there's probably a lot of similarities as far as just like the guilt and shame and hiding and whatever that people can experience that maybe aren't. But I wanted to specifically focus on that, if you wouldn't mind kind of expanding on that so we can understand.
Sure. Well, and as you're saying that, so it, like you said in the beginning, help us to know the words we're supposed to say, right?
Yeah.
So it kind of made me think of something. So absolutely, service members, military members are often put in positions that things that they've done or experienced or witnessed could create a lot of guilt and shame, right? And what they have discovered is by using alcohol or drugs, they in some way becomes the solution. They escape that guilt and shame. So that's why the co-occurring piece is so important, because it's not just the guilt and shame of using, but it's the guilt and shame of something that because of the experience they might have had to do. Right. So I think that's important. We've talked before, and I sent out the message, right, about the word surrender.
Yes.
When I first went to work at Impact, I remember I was sat in a group and they were talking about surrender. And I was like twitching, like thinking, oh my gosh, I can't ever use this word, right?
Yeah.
Because in the military, you don't use the word surrender. In the military, they are trained, specifically depending on your MOS, your job. Some of them, they're trained how to evade and escape. There's specific trainings that they go through, but they're also trained, depending on the level of security that they have, that if they're captured, often to kill each other or to kill themselves before they would be giving up secrets, right? And so the word surrender to them is a no-go.
Yeah.
And so when we talk about accepting and acknowledging, the unmanageability of the life, and that, because of this disease that I need to surrender so that I can tap into this power or this energy and find this other solution. It's how you go about that, I think, that's so important. Having an awareness that that word is very uncomfortable.
Right.
And
I would have never known that unless you sent over that little email, which sparked me to be like, this is something I think people would want to hear about. But yeah, I would have never known that surrender meant it in that way, because I use it so much in my recovery and it's such a different meaning.
It's such a different meaning. Surrender means sure death, right? Or torture.
Yeah.
And suffering to them. So at least having that conversation, like, okay, this is what we talk about, right?
Yes.
And so knowing that might be uncomfortable. Some of them it might not be.
Right.
Because that might not have been drilled. Like in my experience, I've worked with people that, just go over and they don't, although they're trained to not give away secrets, they're not the level of some others that I've worked with that can never tell where they've ever been. Okay? They will take that to their grave.
Yeah.
And so those are the ones that really they isolate and they struggle because they feel even isolated amongst their peers.
Yeah. That's hard. That's really, really hard. Do you see, as far as, I guess, kind of going off of this surrender word, pivoting a little bit with the families, do you work with them on their own quote unquote surrender and maybe surrendering the control with their loved one? What do you see with that?
Yeah, so we do weekly groups, and in the weekly groups, we go along with similar to what the men are learning, right? But we teach it a little bit different. The steps are the same, but we talk about we need to stay on our side of the street. The men are working on cleaning up their side of the street. And although there's things to clean up on our side of the street as a family member, our biggest struggle is staying on our side of the street.
Yeah.
And it's different depending on your relationship. So like with parents, I mean, you spent the first you have young children, right? First 18 years, you're running across to their side of the street, trying to make sure they're going in the right direction. They're wearing the right shoes, they're going to class and doing their homework and all of those, getting to different sports events. And so you spend a lot of time doing that. And now all of a sudden you find out they have this disease, and it's terrifying, heartbreaking. The guilt and shame that goes for parents is, we talk about you didn't cause it, you can't cure it, you can't change it. For parents, if I can get them to hear that and understand it, It's a great relief, because a lot of their desperation is, okay, this is a disease. I I gave this to my child.
Yeah.
Right. Because it's genetic in some ways, right? There's aspects of that we know for sure.
Right.
Research tells us, or experiences that they lived in that cycle themselves and they brought some of that cycle back. So there's a lot of guilt and shame with that. When they see those 3 C's, and we go back to it a lot, that's in step 1 for us, the work we do. I keep bringing them back to that. With significant others, it's, maybe I didn't try hard enough.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I wasn't a good enough spouse.
Yeah.
Maybe I wasn't a good enough mom to the kids. Maybe I should have done this. Maybe I should have done that. And so, again, I keep reminding them, like, look, you're on their side of the street. We got to get back to our side of the street.
Yeah.
So, and that we have no control over how other people act, only how we react to it.
Right.
And by changing our reactions, potentially we could change their actions.
Yeah.
Right. And the way to help and support someone get well is that we need to get well too.
Yes. And I think that's a big piece that a lot of families and loved ones miss. And I say it all the time on here, but there's just so much chaos going on with the addict or alcoholic that the people that are trying to help are not like, I don't need help.
Right.
The person that needs help is this person right here. Can't you see? But when they get better, the families or the loved ones or the friends, then that actually gives the addict a better shot. Yes,
absolutely. In many ways, right? Like a lot of times the guys will be nervous, like, what are you teaching them in that class? Like, right? And I'm telling them how to love you,
right,
and stay on their side of the street,
yeah.
Right? And I remember when I first started working at Impact, I would sit in on all the groups because I wanted to learn. I wasn't aware, and I knew how to do a lot of things, but I really didn't have enough understanding of the culture.
Yes.
Right. And so I would sit in on the groups and I'd be thinking in my silly little mind, oh, how lovely these boys are doing all this work. Right. And seriously, that's what was going on in my head. Like, what great, these men are going to be these amazing men because they're doing this work. And finally, one day I remember it was Colby's group and I'm like, why am I not doing this work? This seems like I could feel better about my world around me if I do this work. So that was what got me kind of excited. Remember, I came to you guys like, we've got to do something. Yes. And so.
Well, and I'll stop you there for a second. We also noticed like we were trying to send families to groups maybe in their community and they weren't having great experiences with it. And so we were just like, there's such a need. Like I started sending people Zoom links for a place in like a group in Texas. Right. And because everybody's from all over and it's hard to find the right group and it takes time. And anyway, so when you had this idea, it was like, this is.
Well, but bouncing it back and forth back and forth to you guys, because I didn't know if I was asking for the right thing either. Right.
Yeah.
But the piece of it is that it needs to be a working group.
Yeah.
And that's where I can see why other groups in the community struggle with that, right? Because let's say I have a group and I've got 4 people, right? And we're doing some step work or we're doing whatever. And then you show up. You've never seen this stuff before. They're already down the river here.
Yeah.
So it's the logistics of being able to do it. And it took a while to figure that out. And it's a work in progress, right? Because when people come in and they've never had any experience whatsoever, a lot of families come in and they've gone to Al-Anon or they've gone to groups in the community. And so they have a general understanding of what they're going to be learning. So it's easy to get them through the first part, but some have never been anywhere, right? And to talk to your point where you said, families are like, well, why do I need to go? I'm not the one with the problem. And that's true, that a lot of families come in with that. I'll send an email inviting them and encouraging them, to buy these books that we're going to do this work on. And sometimes they'll get to the first group and they haven't bought the book.
Yeah.
And I'll say that's okay, but to be able to do the work, you'll need to get the book. And so once they do that, then they start to really see and they start to read the book, which is really simple. And we go along together with the book. And we pull in different things too, from different aspects of recovery. They start to realize, wow, I can benefit from this.
Yeah. Yes. Well, and that's, I think a lot of people are resistant to do something new and change. But what's really cool is that they get to start having this experience within the group, and y'all are all there together to be able to talk about it together and have this kind of, it's just, you're not alone,
Right.
one, and then you're having this experience because you're doing your own work, which is so powerful. And same thing for recovery. Like once I started having an experience around this work, it propelled me to continue with it.
Yes.
But it's I mean, yeah, and it's hard to get started for sure. And I do love how you mentioned the 3 C's, because I've been on conversations with families before, and, the mom's like, I just don't know what I did wrong. I just don't know what I did wrong. And it like breaks my heart because I'm like, you didn't do anything wrong.
Right.
Because we all have different backgrounds. We all have different upbringings. We all have different things that have happened to us or circumstances, but the disease is the same, just as it is with, first responders, military men and women, I mean, it's the same disease that we suffer from, which is hopeful because that means it's the same solution.
Well, and even if you did everything right from the day a child was born, if they have the disease, without intervention, without understanding that, right? And so they probably did everything they knew to do.
Yeah.
No ill intentions or anything like that in
Right.
most cases. And the same as a significant other, lots of times by the time someone gets to treatment, they don't really like that person very much anymore
Mm-hmm.
because they've experienced some pretty difficult things,
Right.
right? Because of the disease and how it manifested in that person's life. But to remind them about the fact that they married them because they loved them.
Mm-hmm.
What were the aspects of that person that they loved? And those things aren't gone.
Right.
They're still there. But this disease has gotten louder.
Yes.
And by going through treatment, there's hope that that person that you fell in love with will present themselves. But to recognize they're going to be down the river further.
Yeah.
They're not that very same person that you met at 18 years old or 20 years old
Right.
or whatever. But the hope that, and the other part that I love about this at Impact is that you're giving them the hope that they can be of service to others.
Mm-hmm.
That's the other piece I think that's really important that I should tie in is that one of the things, if you think about military, first responders, law enforcement, they choose to serve.
Yeah.
They choose. We don't have a draft right now. So they choose to write their name on the line. So when you can show them the aspect of recovery where they'll be able to serve again, that they'll be able to save a life again, it's just amazing.
Yeah. Wow. I didn't think of it that way at all.
God just sent that one. Yeah, because I didn't think of it either till I just said it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really powerful. And that can be just so hopeful too, I think. Just yeah. Okay. Well, let's see here. We've kind of already talked about this a little bit, but as far as, and maybe more on kind of the family side, but similarities that you see with just the men in addiction that come through Impact, men addiction in, the military or veterans, families, vice versa. Do you see, we've talked about how the disease is the same.
Mhm.
So it's from your standpoint, does it show up the same? Does it look the same as far as just the addiction piece?
I think the disease shows up exactly the same. It's just complicated by other aspects, right? And, very often you'll see, we talk about ego and pride and all those things. So, for a person that puts on a uniform, there's a lot of pride in that.
Mm-hmm.
For a man that provides for his family, there's a lot of pride in that.
Yes.
So that's the same thing.
Right.
And when they're unable to do that because of the disease, that whole piece has to be addressed, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes. Well, is there anything else that you wanted to mention or anything else in your heart that you wanted to share?
I think just really recognizing and acknowledging from the military, the law enforcement, first responders standpoint, and the families that experience that, I think that's the other piece. So when talking to the families and their family members gone for 30 some days and they're like, this is forever, I always kind of relate a story about when my husband deployed, and it was during the winter season, and we hadn't had very bad winters at that time. And so he disconnected the snowblower because he didn't want me to hurt myself while he was gone. And so, of course, then we had a major snowstorm.
Of course.
Yeah. And so I opened up the garage door and the snow's up to my waist, and I just sat down and I started crying. I thought, what am I going to do? How am I going to do this? It was that complete feeling of helplessness and desperation.
Mm-hmm.
And it took me a bit. I can't guarantee you how long I sat there in a pity party. But then I said, you know what? I could figure this out. And so I share that with the families a lot because I talk about how you can figure this out.
Yeah.
When someone goes into treatment, their connection or their contact with their family member is limited. And there's a purpose behind that,
mm-hmm.
right? It's important. It's not because we want to harm the family or anything like that, but the person needs to really dedicate themselves to this work.
Yes.
And not have distractions.
Right.
Like you said, a bubble.
Yeah.
So how is that similar to what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah.
A service member is overseas not because they're on vacation.
Yes.
Right? They don't need distractions. And so we need to be able to be on the family side strong
mm-hmm.
and get the support, like you said, that we have available to us and do the work that we need to do so that our family member can do their work.
Right.
And so when I relate that story, a lot of times people are like, whoo, because I'm like, it was a year.
Yeah.
It was gone a year.
Right.
So
yes.
and a lot of stuff happens in a year.
Yes. No, I love that. I know you're like, the snow's up to my waist. You can handle figuring out how to log into a passcode. No, I'm just kidding. I know there's lots of other hard stuff, but
right. There are a lot. I mean, that's when things happen. Like it seems like, the washing machine breaks or there's a leak or the electrical goes out or something. Always seems like those things happen.
Yes.
And they do, right? But you can do it.
Yeah. Well, and I think probably it's a bigger reaction than normal because emotions are already so high, like someone in the the father in the family unit is at treatment. And so now I'm just thinking if it were me with these young kids and something breaks that normally Adams does, and I'm already upset about everything that's gone on and he's not here. And then as something as small as the washer breaking, it's like, oh, of course, like I'm going to react bigger than I probably normally would, more because I'm so wrapped up in everything that's happened over here. It's not necessarily the washing machine that's the problem.
And that, when we talk about the feelings, right? When I talk about the feelings with the families and with the guys about how we have emotions that trigger a response in our brain.
Mm-hmm.
It triggers the response to say, hey, pay attention. And when we ignore them over a period of time, they build up.
Yes.
And so then something as simple as a washing machine breaking, we feel helpless.
Yeah.
We feel frustrated. And so we react and respond like we're going to die.
Yeah.
And our brain is reacting and responding like we're going to die. And what I remind people of is, look, it's not what's wrong with us. It's what's right with us, but it's getting the wrong message. The message that's telling us is we feel helpless. The wrong message is it's going to kill us if the washing machine breaks.
Yeah. Yes. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
This was so great. I had a lot of fun. Hopefully you'll be back.
Thank you. I really enjoyed having the opportunity to share. It's such a thing that's near and dear to my heart, as you can hear. And
yes.
I feel like it's a misunderstood population. And
mm-hmm.
so for people to be able to know that, it's so similar, like you said, the disease is the same.
Yeah.
And we can all work through it together.
Yes. Yes. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you for tuning in to another episode of Impacting Recovery Uncensored. I hope today's conversation has inspired you, opened your mind, maybe even your heart, or given you a sense of hope. And remember, you're not alone. If you found this episode helpful, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to like and subscribe. Follow us on social. All of our links will be in the description box below. But until next time, keep making an impact. Bye, y'all.